Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm here to answer a question, and that question is why analog? So, actually, a while ago, I did a video called Analog versus Digital. I think that's what it was called. And I basically encapsulated most of the opinions I'm about to say in that video. But I'm going to do it again because this is apparently topical now because I have analog stuff. And I've seen a lot of people in the question in the comments asking, what's the difference? What is analog? What's the difference between analog and digital, and all that kind of stuff. And people answer with not necessarily wrong things, but just like things that I personally don't really find important when it came to my decision to get the gear that I have. So let's start off by defining analog versus digital. Actually, no, I'm not totally sure. I'm just gonna Google real quick. Analog. Ha. Interesting. Relating or using signals or information represented by continuously variable physical quantities such as a spatial position or voltage. Jeez. Okay. Basically, an analog synthesizer is something that functions purely by manipulating electricity like directly, which honestly could be the same for digital, but like digital control is a bit different. And functionally, the difference between analog and digital, insofar as music production, is that there are certain limitations to digital, and there are definitely certain limitations to analog. I just want to say right off the bat that like digital can and always will do way more than what analog stuff can do. Analog actual hardware. In fact, the digital things in general, even if it's a digital piece of hardware, just by the fact that it exists in physical space, limits it. It's like comparing a book to the internet. Like that is like the kind of comparison we're talking about right now. And however, there are still benefits and reasons to use analog stuff, and specifically the reasons I'm using analog stuff actually comes down to basically the FM concept. There are still a whole bunch of other things. Like are people in the comments talking about like just being able to touch the stuff has an important impact on what kind of sound design you do, which sure. The inherent sort of unpredictableness of analog stuff and imperfections kind of two are the same there. And that's pretty important. In the sense that like if I took a sine wave output of these oscillators and like put it through like a spectrogram, you would see a lot more harmonics than just the one that's supposed to be just the sine wave. And that's just because analog, and also like a square waves actually have a little bit of like some saw wave stuff in there. It's a bit weird, but that's what's happening. And you might think, okay, well, that's bad. That's like not what it's supposed to be. And you're right about that. But if you always do things that you expect to happen, you're going to very quickly end up in a rut. And that's why it's important to try new things on new stuff, even if it's the same thing. Like I was when I first tried Razor, for example. I don't use Razor now, but I did try Razor, and that gave me ideas of things I could do in Harmor, because it's basically the same process as synthesis, and it doesn't do nearly as many things that Harmor does. It is like technically functionally inferior to Harmor, but it does a few things in ways that are different than what Harmor does by default. Things that I wouldn't have thought to do in Harmor just because of the way that Harmor is presented. So with the way that analog hardware is presented, the way that especially specifically modular synthesis is presented, I end up doing things that I would not have thought to do in a digital world. And there's also the straight up the things that it can't be done in the digital world, and that's mostly FM, as I mentioned before. Now, FM stands for frequency modulation, which is to say that we are modulating something by a frequency. You might be thinking, well, I thought this was because we're modulating a frequency. And that's technically also true, but that's also only true if you're actually modulating a frequency. In analog stuff, you can modulate a lot more than a frequency. You can modulate other signals, but you can also modulate pretty much any parameter that accepts a CV input, which is most parameters. And that is where, like, actually, I just answered before I made this video, I answered the comment on the video I did, which I was just screwing around with the patches. And the guy says, why is it that whenever anybody first gets modular stuff, the first thing they do is they make farty sounding things? And my answer to that is, well, that's because the thing that separates analog from digital is that you can FM pretty much whatever you want, and that's what FM sounds like when you apply it to stuff like that. That bubbly, farty nonsense. That's what that sounds like. And people will listen to that and think to themselves that they can do that sound without modular stuff. And you're absolutely right about that. And I have yet to actually encounter a sound that I made with modular stuff that I couldn't think of at least a few ways that I can make in the digital world. The difference between the two is that it is unbelievably easier to do with the modular stuff, which I don't usually really care about, but it's about that form factor difference that I was mentioning before. It wouldn't occur to me to do things in certain ways that I have within modular stuff, but it also, like, I can't do it in the same way in the digital world. So like, there's definitely things that I could do. Like, for example, there is a sound that Noisia made in their track, the VIP of the block control song, way back in the day. There was one sound in there, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out how to do it. And then, like, within minutes of screwing around with the modular rig that I have, I fucking made it. I wasn't even trying. It just happened. And turns out that particular quality is a result of Filter FM. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh, but Massive has Filter FM. And there's also other plugins that use Filter FM. I forget the name. Circle 2, that plugin has a little bit of Filter FM, but it's not real. It's not true Filter FM. And what I mean by that is that, for example, Massive, you can only do it with the low pass and the high pass. You can't do it with the band pass. You can't do it with a notch. Can't do it with all the other filter types. And analog stuff, you can do it with whatever the hell you want. In the Circle 2 stuff, it's FMing it, but you notice that if you go particular frequencies, it doesn't really do it very well. And not only that, but if you try to FMing anything, even if you do it manually, even if you make an automation clip with a waveform type that's really small and it's going really, really fast, it's not actually moving the parameter that fast. It's not doing it for real. In the analog world, there's no resolution. It is perfect always, and it's because it's real, actual, like, energy that's the signal. There's nothing to interpret. There's nothing to program. It's all instantaneous. That's the benefit of the whole latency business, but nobody really cares about that. It's not something that's super important. It gets important when you start dealing with stuff like envelopes and like triggering sequences and that kind of thing. And to a certain extent, I can get away with some particular behavior, converting digital signals to analog voltage to control some stuff. And like, that's what I've been doing for the most part recently. But actual analog triggering is a whole other world. And I'm actually going to have to get into that. I wasn't expecting to, but I guess I have to. So that's sort of the advantage. But like, the thing I want to drive home about this is that, like, unless I come up with something that I absolutely could not figure out how to do with digital stuff, everything that I have done so far with the analog stuff, you absolutely could do with digital stuff. You just wouldn't be able to do it in the same way. And it wouldn't really occur to you to try it that way either, just because for the most part you can't. So it's a bit of an expansion and research expedition, if you will. And I mean, it's also very expensive. Like, the stuff, people are asking how much this particular rig costs. This particular rig costs about $1,700, and it's tiny by most, comparisons. And it's gonna just grow. It's only gonna get more things, because like, I've been using it for about a day, and I'm just like, I need more things, and that's gonna be my future there. But yeah, that's sort of the reasons why I personally would use this stuff. Like, it's a value proposition, really, because I wouldn't pay that much money for something if it didn't do things that I couldn't do with other stuff. Everything else that everyone's talking about, the whole like analog warmth bullshit, the unpredictableness, the weird janky harmonic structure and all that stuff. All of these things can be done digitally. If you know it exists like that, you can make stuff do that. It's not impossible. And then also, even the timing stuff can be done digitally if you know how to do that kind of stuff. It's not rocket science. It's not like the hardest thing to do in the world. And the idea that anyone thinks that they can't do that is a result of the fundamental misunderstanding of how sampling works. But that's all as far as like just basic processes. That's all stuff that is absolutely possible to do with digital things. It's just a bit harder. It doesn't just do it. It's not something that's just a result of just using the stuff. Like, I put up on SoundCloud a link, just an experiment. I have made some basses. I made like an ARP. I made a chord, and I made like a ARP bass kind of thing. And recording this stuff was very interesting, because I actually had to record out like every individual voice, because the rig that I have is monophonic, and actually getting poly anything in analog synthesis is a task. But the point of that is that the results of it, like the weird angular hardness of each note, the phase uncertainty. So like, I double tracked it and like panned it like I would a guitar, and it worked because of that particular behavior. You could quantify that, and then you could recreate that just fine digitally. But I mean, the way that you can look at it is that I recorded it, and you're hearing it happen in a song inside FL, which means it's being represented digitally. That sound exists as a sampled sound. And if you're hearing it that way, that means that, like, at the end of the day, that it can be done digitally. But like I said, it's not as easy. It's not just like you put it down and it just does it. Like, so some people, that's obviously a valuable thing as well. However, what I was trying to start to say earlier is the value proposition is that, like, I wouldn't pay $1,700 just to have analog warmth, but I would pay it just to have, because, like, as well, this stuff can interact with the digital world. It's not just like a whole separate. It's not just a whole by itself thing. I could take a sound out of FL, route it in my filter, and then FM that in post. I could do a combo analog digital stuff, and for the most part, that's what I'm gonna do, is that kind of stuff. I'm not gonna just do analog stuff and just do digital stuff. Like, that's an incredible waste of, you know, modern power, and that's more or less the purpose of that. However, I wouldn't have considered my life unfulfilled if I never used this stuff. Like, and I'm sure eventually someone will figure out a way to do actual, for real, like, parameter FM in the digital world. It's like, at this point, I feel like it's inexcusable. I can understand, like, you know, back in, like, the Yamaha DX7 days, where for some reason, like, processing power didn't allow you to do direct FM of pitch like that. I mean, actual, like, FM in the digital world, if you didn't know this, is not actually FM. It's not frequency modulating something. It's modulating the phase. It's modulating, like, it's moving the phase, which is causing it to move pitch because of the Doppler effect. That's how FM in the digital world works. But that only works on tones. You can't do that to, like, parameters, and it's an issue. I mean, go ahead and try. And, like, if I could do a direct comparison and just, like, direct modulation of a parameter. And, like, not only that, but it also just behaves way differently. Because, like, along with parameter modulation, direct, real, like, actual FM, where I'm modulating a tone with another tone, behaves just differently the way that digital FM does. Like, a good example is when you modulate something by a tone and then you increase the pitch in digital FM, it, like, that's a bad example, but I mean, I'll do a comparison eventually just to show you, like, more tangibly what's up with that. But I just wanted to put out some information about how why I bought what I did and what's the value of it and that kind of thing. And so now, whenever anybody asks that question, I'll just give them this video, and then they can, you know, have answers. But if you have any answers about this, I have questions. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.